Hey everyone, this is Peter, and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. As you can hear, I still have a cold, so I apologize for that. It might be a little raspy. After we cover this day in history, we will move on to our story of the day, which, like yesterday, isn't about an emperor, a war, or a revolution. It's about something deeper in the woods, or something that's captured, at least, the human imagination for centuries. Hence, it falls into the realm of history. A creature said to walk upright through the forests of North America. Huge, hairy, and silent. Some call it a myth, but others swear that they've seen it with their own eyes. This is the story of Bigfoot. Part folklore, part mystery, and part mirror into the human need to believe in the unknown. We will then finish up with a history brief, where we look at a grassroots and community-led effort to restore dignity to the final resting place of forgotten veterans. A quick word from our sponsors. This day in history. On December 23, 1783, George Washington resigned as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army and returned to civilian life at his home in Mount Vernon, Virginia. It was a powerful act of humility. The man who had led the colonies to independence voluntarily stepped down, reinforcing the ideal of civilian control over the military. December 23, 1823, marks the first publication anonymously of the poem A Visit from St. Nicholas, also better known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, in the Troy Sentinel newspaper. That poem would go on to reshape how generations imagine Santa Claus, sleigh rides, reindeer, and the magical spirit of Christmas Eve. Long before Bigfoot entered popular culture, stories of large, hairy human-like beings roamed across indigenous North American traditions. From the Pacific Northwest to the Great Lakes, native tribes told of creatures who lived on the edges of civilization, powerful, elusive, and deeply spiritual. The Salish and other coast peoples spoke of Sasquatch, a wild man of the woods. That name, anglicized by early settlers, eventually became Sasquatch. Among the Lumi of the Pacific Northwest, the creature was seen as a guardian of the forest, both feared and respected. To the Hoopta and Carrick tribes of Northern California, similar beings were part of creation stories. Not monsters by any means, but just another kind of people, closer to nature than humankind had become. These early accounts weren't about cryptoids or conspiracies. They were about balance between civilization and wilderness, man and nature, the known and the mysterious. And then the settlers came, and the stories changed. In the 1800s, as pioneers pushed westward, they brought with them both curiosity and fear. The wilderness was vast, filled with mountains, forests, and creatures few Europeans had ever seen. Wolves, bears, cougars, all seemed larger than life. Reports of wild men began to appear in newspapers and journals. Some were clearly hoaxes or exaggerations, strange footprints, human-like cries in the night, or giant skeletons discovered and then later disproved. But the frontier imagination didn't need proof. America in the 19th century was obsessed with exploration, with the idea that there were still mysteries left to conquer. If Europe had its dragons and trolls, then surely the New World had its own creature of deep woods. Still, Bigfoot, as we know it, wouldn't be born until 100 years later, from a single set of tracks in the California dirt. The modern legend of Bigfoot began in 1958, so it's fairly recent, near Bluff Creek, California, when a road construction crew found a series of enormous, human-like footprints in the mud. Each was about 16 inches long, too big to be human, too symmetrical to be random. One of the workers, Jerry Crew, took plaster casts of the prints and then brought them to a local newspaper. On October 5, 1958, the Humboldt Times ran the headline, "Giant Footprints Puzzle Residents." The journalist, Andrew Gonzalez, needed a catchy name for the mystery, and so he came up with Bigfoot. The term stuck, and so did the mystery. Within weeks, the story spread nationwide. Radio hosts speculated. Reporters trekked into the woods. Tourists came to see the footprints for themselves. And just like that, a new American legend was born. If 1958 gave Bigfoot its name, then 1967 gave it a face. That year, two men, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, claimed to have captured the creature on film near that same area, Bluff Creek. The footage, about a minute long, shows a large, ape-like figure walking upright through the forest, turning briefly toward the camera before vanishing behind the trees. To some, it was irrefutable proof. Grainy, but clear enough to show muscle movement and a strange, almost human gait. To others, it was an elaborate hoax. A man in costume, they said, cleverly filmed. The debate, however, has never ended. Even today, frame by frame, experts analyze the footage from the 1960s, arguing over shadows, proportions, and camera speed. No one has ever conclusively proven that the video of the 1960s Bigfoot is fake, but then also no one has proven that it's real either. And perhaps that's why the whole story endures, because, well, mystery is stronger than certainty. After the Patterson-Gimlin film, the search for Bigfoot exploded. Amateur investigators, scientists, and enthusiasts flooded into the forests of the Pacific Northwest, armed with plaster, cameras, and hope. Television programs, documentaries, and magazines fanned the flames. By the 1970s, Bigfoot wasn't just a rumor, it was a cultural phenomenon. Organizations like the Bigfoot Field Research Organization, also known as BFRO, began cataloging sightings. Eyewitnesses described creatures between 7 and 10 feet tall, covered in dark hair, with glowing eyes and a powerful musky smell. Footprints continued to surface, some as large as 20 inches, and others with dermal ridges and even alleged mid-tarsal breaks that suggested non-human locomotion. Hair samples, droppings, and blurry photographs poured in. None ever, however, yielded any definite proof. But every piece of evidence, real or imagined, just added another thread to the legend. So, is it a hoax or a hidden species? Skeptics have long argued that Bigfoot is a product of folklore and misidentification, or just outright fabrication. In the late 1990s, the family of Ray Wallace, a logging company owner, revealed that he had used carved wooden feet to take the original 1958 tracks. That revelation discredited many of the earliest sightings. But believers countered that Wallace did not invent Bigfoot. He simply capitalized on something that people were already reporting. Some researchers proposed that Bigfoot might represent a surviving species, a massive extinct ape that lived in Asia hundreds of thousands of years ago. Could a small population have crossed into North America via perhaps the ancient land bridge from Siberia? Others suggested that Bigfoot might be some kind of a hominoid offshoot, a relic cousin of early humans. But no bones, bodies, or DNA evidence have ever been verified. Though most sightings cluster in the Pacific Northwest, Bigfoot isn't confined to just one corner of the map. In Florida, for instance, they call him the skunk ape, a foul-smelling creature said to haunt the swamps of the Everglades. In the Ozarks, he's Momo the Monster. In Ohio, he's known as the Grassman. In the snowy mountains of Alaska and Canada, he's still Sasquatch. Each region adds its own twist and its own accent to the myth. Some say Bigfoot screams like a woman, and others claim that he's gentle, even protective of lost hikers. To some, he's a symbol of wilderness itself, untamed, unknowable, resisting the human urge to conquer everything. That may be the truest part of the story. So maybe the question isn't really whether Bigfoot exists, but why we want him to exist. Those who study folklore say that myths like Bigfoot fill a psychological need. They remind us that the world isn't fully conquered, and that there are still shadows at the edge of the map. In an age of satellites and smartphones, perhaps Bigfoot whispers that some mysteries just refuse to be solved. The History Brief. Today in History News. In a quiet section of Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore, two dedicated workers, Sean Ward and Lyle Garrity, have quietly transformed forgotten burial plots into memorials worth of respect. In 2022, they discovered that one such grave, that of John W. Knox, a Medal of Honor recipient whose life had slipped into obscurity, was unmarked. Under an 1879 law that entitles any U.S. veteran to a government-issued headstone, they thus applied for a marker, and the government shipped them one. Now, a granite plaque on a quiet slope reads, Sergeant John W. Knox, Medal of Honor. But Knox is not alone. Ward and Garrity have installed more than 167 government-issued markers since that date in 2022. Tombstones, plaques, and medallions across graves dating back as far as the Revolutionary War. They're part of a broader wave of grassroots and community-led efforts to restore dignity to the final resting places of veterans who, for one reason or another, were buried without proper recognition. Across the country, Boy Scout troops, history buffs, and descendants of service members have used this program to mark un- or undermarked graves in historic cemeteries. So why does this matter now? Well, the Headstone program, managed by the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, shipped nearly 113,000 markers and memorials just this past year alone, all to private cemeteries as well as national ones. But for many historic burial sites, especially those associated with Black communities or veterans from earlier conflicts whose families lacked the resources, or whose graves were lost in city growth and neglect, these markers are often the first formal recognition that these men have ever received. As journalists working to locate these graves study old cemetery records, scour military archives, and press families to apply, they often find that record keeping for African American veterans especially was historically inconsistent, or disappeared entirely. Anyway, I thought it was a great story to finish the day. And again, I apologize for the cold and the nasally sounding voice. Hopefully it'll get better when I record the next episode. Thank you so much for tuning in once more and helping this humble little show succeed. If you need to email me, you can do so at peter@historyshortspodcast.com. You could also go and find History Shorts at www.historyshortspodcast.com or look for History Shorts on X, Facebook, or Patreon. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you guys all tomorrow.